Okay, I don't want my mate in America, Kent Kruger, to think I'm what does he call it? Speed freak, amphetamine freak, whatever they call it over there, because I was only a speed freak for about 2 years. And then we got sick of it. Well, we had a child, so we had to give it up. Anyway, when she got out of Long Bay Jail, the judge dismissed the case against her because the judge was a gambler who knew Les's father, Tony, and he had a lawyer called Tony Moranto, who was one of the top lawyers in Sydney. And Murray Farquhar was the judge, and he later got barred for doing something shonky. So, the coppers didn't have much of a case against her anyway, because LSD was still, it wasn't LSD. Yeah, anyway, she got out of it. Anyway, so then her father flew her down to Melbourne to stay with the Playboy nightclub owner, and Les was to be secretary. Well, without Les to cuddle, Sydney seemed dull. So John Sandy was going to go north. So I said, I'll come with you, just for the fun of travelling. So we took no luggage and we slept in football oval grandstands along the way. And when we got to a town, we'd knock on the door of a church and ask, could you please spare a sandwich? Well, Protestants gave us usually a sandwich, and Catholics said, fuck off, you're getting nothing. And we hitched for 7 days until at Mackay we almost got arrested for vagrancy. And Sandy promised the cops that he'd go north to Mount Isa and get a job in the mines. And later on he got rich because of that. And stupid me, I promised I'd go back to Sydney if they'd let me go. So I started hitching back to Sydney. We tried to jump a train actually at one stage, but it was going too fast. And in Australia, you don't know where trains are going. They could be going who knows where. So I had no idea about trains. But I would have loved to have jumped a train, but we never got the opportunity. Anyway, and then just coming back to Sydney, just north of Brisbane, I saw an abandoned movie theatre. Oh, shit. And nobody was around, and I found a way in. And I saw the seats had been taken away long ago. It was covered in dust, and I climbed up the dusty stairs to the projection room and looked around. And in a drawer were 15 movie posters from the 1960s, 3 foot by 1 foot. So I rolled them up and took them with me. And I must have lost them along when we got back to Sydney, because I tried to find them once, but I don't know what happened to them. Maybe someone stole them. Anyway, back in Sydney, I ran into Dutch Andy, my old hippie pal from the hippie days, because I'd turned my back on the Royal George hippie crown now that I had a nice girlfriend. I didn't give a fuck about him now I had a girlfriend. But I still ran into them occasionally, and then Dutch Andy got a bottle of 50 methadone tablets. And after taking a couple, he talked me into getting the train to Melbourne, because I'd told him that Leslie was down in Melbourne. And he thought, I'll pay for the tickets, man, and then we find that rich chick that you dig, and we both live with her. Okay. He plotted, and I knew what he was up to. He wanted to suck onto me and then suck onto Leslie. But I thought I'd use him and the methadone tablets to get down to Melbourne. But when we got to the train station, he told me that he had no money for the train fare and he was going to stow away on the train. So we got on the train and we tried to hide under the seats, but there was no room to climb under the seats. And then we asked a lady if we could hide under her blanket, put the blanket over her leg, and we would hide under it when the conductor came to check the tickets. But she told us to piss off. So we couldn't get the train that way. But the next day, Dutch Andy turned up and he said, "I've got the tickets. I've got money for the tickets," because his parents in Holland used to send him money so that he wouldn't go back and live with them. You know, he was such a terrible alcoholic. So we got the Melbourne Express. We both got tickets. And on the way down, we sang, Don't bring me down. And no milk today, my love has gone away. We sang in a comical manner to other passengers because Dutch had brought a bottle of scotch with him and we both got a little drunk. Don't bring me down. Oh, fuck, I don't remember singing that. I've written it here that we sang Don't Bring Me Down. It would have been the Animals version, I think, yeah. Anyway, hoping to find Les in Melbourne, we moved into Fat Lily's pad in I call her Big Lily. She was a big girl. She wasn't fat. We moved into Big Lily's pad in Carlton. That's where lived Melbourne Jeff, Dave Abrahams, he was Jewish, and the folk singing brothers, the Duffy brothers. They were well-known folk singers in Melbourne. And we just hung around in their place, eating their food, because Dutch had run out of money by then, and I never had any to begin with. So one night, Les heard that I was in town. You know, the word spreads when Kaz comes into town in those days. Because all the hippies were a pretty tight-knit mob. Although there were no mobile phones, it was all word of mouth. Les heard that I was in town, and one summer night I felt a mystical urge. I just felt this mystical urge to stroll. So I walked out into the Carlton air about 11 p.m. at night, and I was just walking around the block, probably looking for cigarette butts because I picked up butts, you know, I was always short of tobacco. And around the corner, Leslie appeared. She'd tracked me down with her inbuilt radar. We went back to the flat to collect my 2 shirts, a denim jacket, and a few of Dutch Andy's meth pills. Dutch was annoyed that I was leaving him with no profit because Leslie didn't want him to come with us. So I said, I'm pissing off with Leslie. And he said, you fucking Hebrew Juno square. You know, he was real pissed off at her for finding me because he was using me because people would put up with us two being in their house. But if he was on his own, people didn't want him in the house because he was such a terrible drunk. You know, when he was drunk, sometimes he'd piss on people's floor deliberately just to get a rise out of them. So he was not very popular as a house guest. Now, when he called her a fucking Hebrew Juno square, well, she wasn't Hebrew. She was normal Aussie, you know, and she didn't even have a nose. But Dutch, when he said that, Dutch was laying on a couch. So Les actually jumped up and down on him twice and he squawked, "Ah, you Nazi psycho!" And then Les jumped off. She jumped up and down twice, actually. And I was a bit worried he was going to hit her because I would have bloody defended her, but then impressed by her attack, Dutch Andy turned as mild as a lamb and never raised his voice to her again. So I went with Les. I said, "Bye-bye, Dutch. Bye-bye, Lily. Bye-bye, Dave." And I moved into Les's St Kilda flat. Her dad, she was working at the Playboy nightclub as payroll clerk and getting a few bucks on the side. And she was living in a flat that her father had got her in St Kilda, which is a beachside suburb. And while she was there, she'd met two teenagers called Help and Quick, who had a car, and she taught them to burgle chemist shops. Now, those kids did all the work and Les waited in the car. And I say taught them to do chemist bust, one chemist bust, one only. You know, Les wasn't a full-time crim. But she just did one bust so she could get some dexedrine and methadone pills. I did not do any busts, of course, because I was afraid of getting arrested and losing Leslie. I didn't care about dope at all, but it was very hard not to indulge when everybody else around you is so joyfully stimulated. And the reason why those kids in the next door flat were called Help and Quick is because Leslie tried cocaine for the first time one night and almost overdosed. I was out somewhere, but she yelled out, "Help!" and "Quick!" And the two teenagers come running in from the next room, from the next flat. It was like in Pulp Fiction movie. With Les's medical knowledge, she told them what drugs to mix to get her lungs working again properly. Because she read medical books for fun. She always had a medical book in front of her, and she got all the latest medical and science and magazines. She spent money on them instead of food, you know. She's always reading scientific magazines, and she loves studying medicine. And we had all the MIMS, drug compendium that came out every year with all the latest drugs in it. So Les was a walking chemical knowledge factory. And so she told him what to do, and after that she named the boys Help and Quick. None of us took cocaine because it's very addictive and it doesn't last long enough, you know. It's a wise choice. We never liked coke. We tried it once, but it doesn't last long enough. We had speed tablets instead, but no money. But all we ate was potatoes because we'd found some potatoes in a box on a neighbour's balcony one night when we were very hungry, and they were starting to go green. But we cooked them up and we ate them for about 4 days, and we were so hungry. But you know, when you're on amphetamine. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm a terrible speed freak, Kent, because I only took it because it was there. You know, if I was on my own, I would have never bloody bothered with drugs. But because I was in an atmosphere of all those people, I sort of joined in. And then finally, when we were really starving, Help and Quick drove us to Sydney, and we moved back to 98 Hargrave Street, Paddington. King's Cross was now swinging with hippies and mods and freaks and rock groups and Surf City had opened, and LSD and methadone were getting too much publicity. Irish John looked like an Arab hobbit with a large hooked nose, a beard like Jesus, and a strange smile that made people think that he was lost. He came from a large poverty-struck Irish family. As a child, he'd been given to the Catholic Church to raise. While in their care in Ireland, he was sexually abused. But as he got older, he regained his faith and forgave the Catholic Church. And he escaped the Jesuits when he was about 23. And in 1965, he came to Australia. He wandered Sydney's dockland with no money and no idea what to do next. Fortunately, he met Johnny Patch, who wore a patch over his eye, thus the name. Patch brought him home, and we let Irish John sleep on our floor. And Irish John said, "I'm so fortunate to have landed amongst such nice people." Irish developed an appreciation of cannabis, and when quietly spoken little Dick took off to Nimbin to develop a commune, Irish went with him, and it would be 7 years before he reappears in my story. Okay, that's the end of this chapter. I don't want to go too long. I'm trying to get to the good bits, because some of these are shithouse bits. But it all leads up to some good bits later on. Well, to me they're good bits because they're weird. To other people they may seem a bit shonky. Shonky, that's a word that Leslie invented, I think, or maybe other people used it. Shonky means a bit, not quite on the level, which is what I am most of the time, not quite on the level. But, I'm a nice guy eventually, went deep down inside. Don't they all say that?